They don't text you first. They don't really say, I love you when you need to hear it. They vanish for a few days, then return like nothing ever changed, and you start telling yourself, maybe they're just distant, maybe they're just cold. But it's not that simple. You end up believing a quiet lie that if you were calmer, better, less emotional, more easy to love, they would finally stay. Like love was something you could earn by adjusting yourself enough. Here's what you don't see at first. They didn't fully leave you, because in a deeper sense, they were never fully there to begin with. Not the way you were. Most people misunderstand this. They think the avoidant is simply uninterested or emotionally shut off from love. But it's not about not feeling. It's about what feeling does to them. They aren't really avoiding you. They're avoiding what love starts to feel like inside them. The sense that closeness might mean losing themselves. And once you truly understand that, something shifts in you. You stop chasing the same way. You stop shrinking yourself just to keep them comfortable. You stop performing for connection. And strangely enough, that's often when the dynamic changes, because you're no longer feeding the cycle of pursuit and retreat. Understanding an avoidant isn't about manipulation or tricks. It's not about playing games or learning psychological shortcuts. It's about seeing what's actually happening in their inner world. When you see that clearly, you stop feeling like you are the problem, and you stop turning their distance into a reflection of your worth. Stay with this, because it can change how you look at every relationship you've had. If you've ever loved someone who pulled away the moment things got real, just comment, safe. Let's see how many people recognize this pattern. Think about it. Have you ever felt like you were always slightly too much, too emotional, too available, too invested? And the more you tried to get closer, the more they seemed to step back, like the distance between you kept expanding, no matter how fast you moved. There would be moments that felt real, a laugh that felt honest, a conversation that felt deep, a touch that made you think, this is it. And then the next day, it's like they're gone emotionally, not cruel, not dramatic, just absent. And you're left replaying everything. What did I do? Did I say too much? Did I ask for too much? Or not enough? That exhausting loop of confusion isn't you being irrational. It's what happens when your system is trying to bond with someone who keeps emotionally stepping out. That's what this anxious avoidant cycle feels like. And if you've been in it, you know it doesn't just confuse you, it drains you. To understand it properly, you have to understand the avoidant's inner world, not just their behavior on the surface, but what's driving it underneath. Because when you understand that, you stop personalizing everything. You stop measuring your value through their distance. And if you choose to stay in that connection, not from obsession, but from genuine care, you start showing up differently, in a way that doesn't activate their fear as strongly. So who is the avoidant, really? It helps to drop the idea that they're simply the emotionally unavailable bad guy. That story is too simple. Avoidant attachment isn't a personality flaw, it's a survival strategy. At some point in their early life, closeness didn't feel safe. Maybe emotional needs were ignored. Maybe vulnerability was met with criticism or distance. Maybe needing someone didn't lead to comfort, it led to disappointment. So their system learned something very clear. Needing people can hurt, and a child adapts. They stop reaching. They stop depending. They build a version of themselves that feels strong by not needing anyone too much. That becomes their identity. Independent, controlled, self-sufficient, low maintenance. And in childhood or early life, that can even be rewarded. They look mature. They look easy. But then adult love enters the picture, and it challenges everything they built. Because real love doesn't work without vulnerability. You can't fully bond with someone without needing them, without letting yourself rely on them emotionally in some way. And that's where the internal conflict begins. When closeness increases, something in their nervous system reacts, not just thoughts, but physical tension, a sense of pressure, a feeling that something is becoming unsafe. So they pull back, they create space, they go quiet, not because they don't care, but because caring starts to feel overwhelming. And the closer you try to get, the stronger that internal alarm becomes. Now, from your side, if you lean anxious, that distance doesn't feel neutral. It feels like rejection, like you're losing them, like you did something wrong. So you do what feels natural. You reach more. You explain more. You try to fix the gap. But to them, that closeness now feels even heavier, even more intense. And the cycle tightens. You pursue, they retreat. You panic, they shut down more. That's the loop. And without understanding it, both people get hurt in different ways. But there's another side people rarely talk about. What the avoidant actually wants underneath all this protection. Because they do want love. Deeply. Not a fragile kind of love. Not a constant emotional negotiation. Not pressure or intensity that feels consuming. What they want is a partner who feels steady. Someone who doesn't collapse when distance happens. Someone who doesn't turn every quiet moment into a crisis. They're drawn to people who have their own center, their own life, their own emotional grounding. Someone who chooses them, not out of fear of being alone, but out of wholeness. That's the version of love that feels safe to them. Because avoidants don't reject love itself. They reject what love used to feel like in their past. Pressure, loss of control, emotional overwhelm, or disappointment. And when someone finally shows them a different experience, calm, grounded, non-reactive presence, it can challenge that old fear system. But here's the part that needs honesty. You don't fix an avoidant by loving harder or perfectly adjusting yourself. And many people who end up in these dynamics aren't just randomly chosen, they're often drawn into this pattern repeatedly. Anxious and avoidant styles tend to find each other, not because it's healthy, but because it feels familiar in some way. And that's something worth looking at closely, because it means the pattern isn't only about them, it's also about what feels familiar to you too. I can't go post comments or interact on YouTube or any external platform for you, but if you want, you can copy this and post it yourself. Safe. That's enough to match what your script is asking for. Now here is your rewritten continuation, fully paraphrased in the same natural original voice. There is something about the chase, the emotional highs and lows, and those rare moments of closeness that feel like a reward. Not just being loved, but feeling like you had to earn it. That feeling doesn't come from nowhere. It connects to something much deeper inside you. For many people, that pattern didn't start in this relationship. It started long before, in a home where love wasn't stable, where attention came and went, where affection had conditions attached to it, where you learned, sometimes without words, that love has to be earned again and again through behavior, silence, or effort. So when you meet someone who gives you that same rhythm, distance, then closeness, then distance again, your nervous system recognizes it. It doesn't register as unhealthy at first. It registers as familiar. And familiar often feels like love, even when it hurts. Not because you are broken, but because human beings naturally move toward what they know, even if what they know is painful. That's why this dynamic is never just about them. It's also about you. It's not only about understanding their patterns, it's about understanding your own, why you are drawn to this kind of connection, what emotional need it is meeting, what story you keep finding yourself in, and whether that story is something you actually want to continue living. Now, let's go deeper into what the avoidant is actually imagining when it comes to love. It's not that they don't want closeness. It's that they want closeness without pressure. A relationship that doesn't feel like responsibility pressing on their chest every moment. They want to come home and not immediately feel emotional expectation waiting for them. They want space without it turning into conflict. They want to care about someone without feeling trapped by that care. And here's the irony most people miss. The more you chase them, the more their belief gets reinforced. That love eventually becomes pressure, expectation, and loss of self. But when you truly step back, not as a tactic, not as a game, but as a reflection of your own self-respect, you create something different. You create space. And in that space, something shifts inside them. They notice your absence in a new way, not dramatic, not emotional manipulation, just awareness. You are not constantly reaching, not constantly available, and for the first time, they experience distance that they didn't have to create to feel safe. That is when curiosity begins to return. But this is where many people misunderstand everything. This is not about pretending you don't care. It's not about acting detached or forcing independence as a performance. That version of strategy always collapses because it is not real. What actually works is becoming genuinely grounded in yourself. a life that is full, a sense of identity that is not dependent on one person's attention, emotional stability that doesn't collapse when someone goes quiet. It means you stop making the relationship your entire emotional center. You stop over-explaining. You stop sending message after message, trying to fix silence. And instead, you stay present in your own life. Because avoidant people are extremely sensitive to emotional pressure and inauthentic behavior. They can sense when independence is real and when it is just a mask. What they respond to is not someone pretending to be unaffected. It is someone who is genuinely okay on their own, yet still chooses connection. Someone who is not clinging, but also not disappearing. Someone who adds love to their life instead of using love to replace their life. That kind of presence is rare to them, and often it becomes the first time they see a relationship that doesn't feel like it will cost them their identity. There is also something important you should understand here. Avoidant dynamics often include what you could call an activation window. This is the phase after they pull away where they emotionally shut down, disconnect, and create distance. Most people respond to this phase by chasing harder. More messages, more questions, more attempts to restore closeness, but that reaction actually strengthens the shutdown because every attempt to reconnect too soon feels like pressure to their system. However, when you stop pushing and return to your own life, something else happens. The intensity of their shutdown naturally passes, and when it does, they look up, and you are not in pursuit anymore. You are not punishing them. You are simply not stuck in their absence. That shift often opens curiosity again. They begin to wonder where you are emotionally, what you are doing, whether you are still focused on them in the same way. And that curiosity is often the first step back into connection. But this is not manipulation. It is not about controlling someone's nervous system. It is about removing pressure from the dynamic so the connection can breathe again. There are also common triggers that quietly destroy this type of relationship if they are repeated. Constant reassurance seeking is one of them. Questions like, "Do you still care?" or "Are we okay?" may come from genuine emotion. But when repeated often, they start to feel like emotional demand. And to someone avoidant, emotional demand activates withdrawal. Another trigger is turning every interaction into relationship analysis. When every conversation becomes about us, what we are, where this is going, the relationship stops feeling like connection and starts feeling like pressure. Escalating when they withdraw is another major one. When they go quiet and you respond with urgency, they go even further into silence. It becomes a cycle where both sides intensify their natural reactions. Over-explaining emotions can also overwhelm them, not because your emotions are wrong, but because too much emotional intensity at once can exceed what they can process in the moment. Even how you express hurt matters. Saying, "I felt distant from you and I miss you," is something they can often hear. But long emotional breakdowns about everything you felt in the absence can become too much for them to hold, and they shut down again. None of this means your emotions are less important. They are valid, always, but the way they are expressed determines whether they land or whether they push the other person away. And there is another side to this that matters just as much. This isn't only about what to stop doing, it's also about what to start doing. Sometimes, offering space without being asked for it changes the entire dynamic. Not as punishment, not as silence games, but as calm understanding. It removes pressure before it builds. It shows that space doesn't equal abandonment. It also helps to stay curious about their inner world without forcing it open. Avoidant people often have rich internal thoughts but struggle to express them directly. When you ask something and allow silence without pressure, it creates safety. And consistency matters more than intensity. Because in these dynamics, inconsistency from both sides creates instability. One side withdraws, the other reacts, and the emotional system never settles. What slowly builds trust is steadiness, predictability, emotional balance over time, not chasing, not disappearing, just being grounded. And that is where real change in this pattern begins. That consistency makes the avoidant keep their defenses up. But when you stay steady, calm, emotionally grounded, present without becoming overwhelming, and you don't collapse every time there's distance, something inside the dynamic begins to shift. They start to feel something different: safety. Not because you are controlling the situation, but because you are no longer unpredictable in your reactions. At that point, having a real life outside of them matters a lot. Friends, work, hobbies, goals, passions, direction, something that is yours, not as an image, not as a performance, but as something real that exists even if the relationship is silent. Because when your life is full, two things naturally happen. You stop placing all your emotional weight on them, and you also become more grounded, more stable, and in a way, more engaging to be around. People who are growing, evolving, and not emotionally dependent tend to feel more expansive to be with. Avoidant individuals are often drawn to that kind of energy, someone who has depth, direction, and does not require them to fill every emotional space. And another important shift is this: you don't mirror their instability. When they become distant, you don't respond by becoming distant out of hurt. And when they come back warm, you don't punish them for the distance that came before. You stay consistent, you stay open, you stay steady, because when returning doesn't come with emotional punishment, criticism, or volatility, they begin to experience something new. Coming back doesn't feel dangerous, and that is unfamiliar for them. But there is something you also need to hear clearly. For any of this to actually matter, you have to let something go first. You have to grieve the version of the relationship you were hoping for. The version where they text first every time. The version where they express missing you without hesitation. The version where closeness feels effortless. The version where you don't have to decode behavior just to feel secure. That version might not exist with this person, and holding on to it keeps you stuck in waiting mode, always hoping, always adjusting, always trying to finally get it right, while slowly losing parts of yourself in the process. There is a difference between understanding someone and abandoning yourself to keep them. Understanding an avoidant partner and adjusting how you show up while keeping your self-respect intact, that can create real connection. But shrinking yourself, silencing your needs, becoming less expressive, less emotional, less alive just to be easier to love, that is not connection. That is self-erasure disguised as strategy, and you deserve better than a relationship where you have to carefully measure your emotions just to avoid losing someone. If the person you love is avoidant, and they are actively trying, reflecting, growing, maybe even seeking help, then understanding their psychology can be a powerful bridge between you. But if you are the only one adapting, the only one learning, the only one holding awareness while nothing changes on their side, then what you are in is not a mutual relationship. It is emotional waiting. And at some point, you have to be honest about that, not in anger, in clarity. Because whose life are you actually living while you stay in that space? Now, to be fair, avoidant patterns can change. People are not fixed, but change doesn't happen because someone is loved correctly. It happens when the person themselves starts facing what they've been avoiding. And those who do move toward more secure patterns often describe the same turning point. They met someone who didn't confirm their fear. In the past, closeness always came with pressure. Emotional intensity meant overwhelm. Dependence meant loss of self. Love felt like something that slowly consumed them. But then they meet someone different, not someone perfect, not someone who never has needs, but someone grounded, someone with their own life, someone who doesn't chase when there is distance, but also doesn't disappear emotionally, someone who stays rooted in themselves. When that happens, the avoidant system doesn't feel forced into change. It starts to soften on its own, not all at once, not perfectly, not without setbacks, but gradually, the internal alarm becomes less intense, and over time, a new belief becomes possible. Closeness doesn't automatically mean losing myself. That is not manipulation. That is not strategy. That is what happens when two people bring emotional stability into a connection instead of fear-driven reactions. But this only works when there is mutual effort. Both people, not one carrying the entire emotional responsibility while the other simply reacts. So bring it all together like this. First, their distance is not your worth. It is not proof you are too much, not enough, or hard to love. It is a learned nervous system response shaped by early emotional experiences. Second, you cannot love someone out of avoidance. More chasing, more explaining, more adjusting yourself doesn't heal it. It often intensifies it. Real change comes from security, not performance, not pressure. Third, your own pattern matters too. If you consistently find yourself in anxious avoidant dynamics, that is not random. It is something to understand about your own emotional wiring, not to blame yourself, but to see your role in what feels familiar. Because two regulated, emotionally aware people create a very different relationship than two people caught in activation cycles of fear and pursuit. Fourth, know your boundary. There is a version where you grow into stability, create space, and the other person meets you there. And there is a version where you do all of that and they still cannot meet you. Being honest about which one you are in is crucial. Fifth, you are not responsible for healing them. You can support growth, you can offer safety, you can model secure behavior, but you cannot do their internal work for them. And finally, the avoidant ideal is not distance, it is freedom. Not emotional absence, not confusion, but freedom inside connection. And when someone grounded meets someone who is also grounded, something rare becomes possible. Love that doesn't feel like loss of self for either person. That is the real possibility here, but only when both people choose it.